The loner rancher expected his mail-order bride, yet his half-sister arrived with the contract. His days were long, filled with work from dawn until dusk, and his nights were even longer, often spent in silence, with only the stars above for company. He had inherited the ranch from his father, a stern man who had loved the land more than people, and John had followed in his footsteps, learning to care for the cattle, mend fences, and keep the ranch running smoothly. Despite the hard work, there was a sense of pride in what he had built, a small but sturdy home, rolling fields of grass, and herds of healthy cattle that thrived under his careful attention. Yet, beneath the surface of his strong, silent exterior, John carried a quiet longing. He was a man of routine, but he also knew the ache of loneliness. He had friends in the nearby town, neighbors who waved as he passed on his horse or stopped by to sell supplies, but there was no one to share the small victories or the quiet evenings by the fire. His heart yearned for someone who could understand the rhythms of his life, someone who could walk beside him on the land that had been his only constant for so many years. For months, John had wrestled with an idea that felt both strange and hopeful. He had placed an advertisement in a national newspaper, seeking a mail-order bride. It was a decision he had not made lightly. In a world where people seemed to find love easily in cities or towns, his isolation had made that impossible. He had imagined, over many quiet nights, a woman arriving at his ranch, a partner who would not only share his life but also care for the land he loved so dearly. He pictured her gentle hands helping with the cattle, her laughter echoing across the fields, and her presence turning the empty rooms of his house into a home. John knew the risks. There was no guarantee that a woman would agree to such a life, let alone arrive at his ranch. Some might think him foolish or desperate, but he refused to let pride stand in the way of hope. Each letter he had received from prospective brides had been carefully read and reread. Some were too formal, too distant. Others seemed charming but impractical, with dreams that would never fit a life so rooted in the earth and sky. But finally, there was one letter that felt different. It was thoughtful, kind, and carried a sense of understanding that seemed rare in the other letters he had received. He kept the letter close, reading it over quietly in the evenings by the light of the lamp, imagining the life it suggested, and wondering when the woman would arrive. As the weeks turned into months, John prepared for her arrival in small ways. He cleaned the house thoroughly, dusting the corners that had been ignored for years. He fixed the gate to the barn and repaired a leaky roof that had been bothering him through the last storm. Every detail mattered because he wanted the ranch to be a welcoming place, a place where a new life could begin. At the same time, he worked harder than ever in the fields and with the cattle, knowing that life on a ranch required constant care and attention. The work was tiring, but it also gave him a sense of purpose, and he felt that by the time she arrived, everything would be ready for her to step into this life as smoothly as possible. Evenings on the ranch were quiet, almost eerily so. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the tall grasses and the distant lowing of the cattle. John often sat on the porch, a blanket over his shoulders, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the sky shift through shades of pink, orange, and purple. These moments were peaceful, but they also reminded him of the emptiness in his life. He longed for conversation, for someone to share the small joys of the day, the successful repair of a fence, the birth of a calf, or the simple beauty of the first frost on the grass. He dreamed of evenings spent with someone by the fire, sipping tea, talking about the world, and perhaps sharing silent moments that needed no words at all. Despite his anticipation, John could not ignore the nervous excitement building in him. He wondered what she would look like, how she would speak, and if they would truly be compatible. He imagined walking out to meet her, the crunch of the gravel beneath his boots, and the sight of a figure approaching on the road from the town. Would she be shy, bold, cheerful, or serious? He did not know, but he held on to hope, the kind that sustains people in lonely places, the kind that whispers that life might just surprise you if you are willing to take a risk. At the same time, John's mind often wandered to his past, to the moments of joy and pain that had shaped him. He thought of his childhood, growing up with a father who was often stern and distant, and the few times his mother had visited, leaving behind memories of warmth that had faded too soon. He remembered learning to ride horses, tending to animals, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-kept field. These memories were a mixture of happiness and melancholy, shaping a man who valued work, honesty, and simplicity, yet longed for connection that went beyond friendship or obligation. The town knew John as a solitary man, dependable but private. He was respected for his dedication to his work and admired for the way he treated his animals and neighbors. Yet, few knew the depth of his longing for companionship. The thought of a mail-order bride was whispered about occasionally, a topic of curiosity, but John paid little attention to gossip. His focus was on the reality of the ranch, on preparing his life for someone who might bring it a new kind of warmth. He understood that this woman, if she arrived, would not only be joining his life but also his responsibilities, his routines, and the land he cherished. As autumn approached, the landscape around the ranch transformed. The fields turned golden, the air grew crisp, and the nights became longer. John's anticipation grew alongside the changing season. Each day, he watched the horizon, half expecting a figure to appear on the dusty road leading to his home. He imagined greeting her, shaking hands, and exchanging polite words before slowly learning to understand each other's rhythms, dreams, and fears. He was not naive. He knew the challenges ahead. A life on a ranch was demanding, and building a relationship from letters alone would not be simple. Yet, he held on to the hope that perhaps, against all odds, it could work. John's evenings became a mixture of preparation and reflection. He repaired the barn doors, mended broken fences, and checked the water troughs, all the while imagining how she would react to each corner of the ranch. Would she smile at the sight of the horses grazing? Would she appreciate the care he put into the home and land? He felt both excitement and anxiety. The unknown was intimidating, but it was also full of possibilities. On one particular morning, as the sun rose over the distant hills, John felt a stir of anticipation stronger than ever. He had prepared breakfast, cleaned the porch, and made sure the path from the gate to the house was clear. His heart pounded as he thought that today, perhaps, the long-awaited visitor would arrive. For the first time in many years, he felt a mixture of hope, excitement, and fear, emotions he had not allowed himself to feel fully in decades. This day, he realized, could change everything. His life, which had been steady, predictable, and solitary, might finally shift into something new, something that he had longed for but never truly believed would come. John Marshall, the lonely rancher, stood on the threshold of change. The land he had cherished and the life he had built were ready to welcome someone new, even if he did not yet know who she would be. As he waited, he allowed himself to dream, to imagine laughter echoing across the fields, shared meals by the fire, and the quiet comfort of another presence beside him. He was ready for the unexpected, ready for the possibility that life could surprise him in ways he had never anticipated. The morning started with a crisp chill in the air. Mist lingered over the fields, softening the edges of the distant hills and giving the ranch an almost magical appearance. John Marshall was standing near the gate, squinting down the long dirt road that stretched to the town. Every so often, he thought he saw a figure in the distance, only for it to disappear as quickly as it appeared. His heart beat faster with every passing moment, a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy coursing through him. Today, he thought, might finally be the day that changed his life. He heard the sound of wheels crunching on gravel long before he saw the carriage. His first instinct was to straighten his posture and smooth down his jacket, as if preparing to greet a visitor he had imagined countless times over the past months. But when the carriage finally came into view, John noticed something unexpected. The woman stepping down was not the delicate, poised figure he had pictured from the letters. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, her eyes calm but focused, and in her hands was a neatly folded document. For a moment, John was frozen, unsure how to respond. The woman looked familiar in some way, as if a distant memory had been awakened in him. "Hello," she said, her voice steady and polite. "I'm Emily, John Marshall, I presume." "Yes," John said slowly, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and unease. Yes, I'm John. I'm your half-sister," she replied simply. She offered the folded contract with both hands. "I've come to ensure that the arrangement you've been expecting is handled correctly. Our family entrusted me with this task." John's mind raced. Half-sister, family, Maylord or bride. The words collided in his head, creating confusion and disbelief. He had spent months imagining a bride, a woman who would bring warmth into his quiet life. And now, standing before him, was someone he barely knew, claiming a connection he had not expected to confront at this stage in his life. Emily noticed the surprise in his eyes and smiled faintly, sensing his hesitation. "I know this is unexpected," she said softly. "I understand why you were expecting someone else entirely, but I promise I'm here to help, not to interfere. I just want to make sure everything goes according to the family's wishes." John ran a hand over his face, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts. His first instinct was to turn away, to retreat into the routines that had defined his life for so long. But something in Emily's presence made that difficult. There was a quiet strength about her, a sense of purpose that resonated with him even as it confused him. He stepped forward slowly, taking the contract from her hands and unfolding it. The words on the paper were clear and formal, detailing the arrangement he had made months earlier, but with a clause that seemed to indicate oversight or supervision by a family member. I didn't know anyone would come along with this," John said finally, his voice low but steady. Emily nodded. "Most people don't. That's why I'm here. I'm not here to judge or disrupt, only to ensure clarity. The family wanted someone to make sure the process was honest and that expectations were clear. That's my role." As John read through the contract, he began to feel a strange mix of relief and tension. On one hand, he appreciated the transparency and the presence of a person who seemed dependable. On the other, he realized that the arrival of Emily completely disrupted the mental picture he had built over months. She was not the bride he had imagined, the companion he had longed for, or the person who would sit beside him in the quiet evenings on the porch. Yet she was family, a connection he had never known fully, but that carried a weight and responsibility he could not ignore. The first few days were awkward. Emily settled into the house with a careful awareness of boundaries, never imposing but always present. She helped John organize the paperwork, sorted through letters and notes, and even participated in the daily chores around the ranch. At first, John found her presence distracting. He had been accustomed to silence, to working without oversight or company, and suddenly there was someone sharing his routines, asking questions, offering suggestions, and moving through the space he had thought of as entirely his own. Yet, over time, he noticed subtle changes. Emily was not just another person in his home. She brought efficiency, attention to detail, and a calm reassurance that allowed him to focus on other tasks. When a fence needed mending, she offered solutions that John had not considered. When a calf was born, she was there with gentle hands and careful observation. The ranch, once a place of solitary effort, became a shared space of cooperation and collaboration. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. John found himself talking about his childhood, the ranch, and the hopes he had harbored for the future. Emily listened patiently, offering thoughts when appropriate but mostly allowing him to speak. For the first time in years, John felt heard, understood, and less alone. He realized that companionship did not always come in the form he expected. Sometimes, it arrived quietly, with gentle support and understanding, in the form of someone who genuinely cared about the life you had built. Despite this growing connection, tension remained. John still thought of the woman he had hoped would arrive as his bride. Letters continued to arrive from her, reminding him of the original plan. Each one brought a mixture of excitement and guilt. He felt excitement at the possibility of romance and companionship, but guilt for the way Emily had seamlessly entered his life, changing the dynamic in ways he had not anticipated. He wondered if pursuing the mail-order bride would disrupt the harmony that was slowly developing on the ranch, or if it was simply a step toward fulfilling a dream that had been long delayed. Emily, perceptive as always, noticed the change in his demeanor. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, she spoke gently. "John, I know you're waiting for someone else. I don't want to interfere with what you hoped for, but I think it's worth asking yourself what you really want. Is it the idea of a bride, or is it someone who truly understands you, who shares your life and your work?" John was silent for a long time, pondering her words. It was an uncomfortable question, but an important one. He had imagined love in a very specific form, a woman arriving with elegance, charm, and companionship that matched his vision. But Emily's presence, steady and supportive, challenged that vision. She was not the woman he had dreamed of, yet she brought qualities he had never considered: understanding, reliability, and a sense of connection that ran deeper than he expected. Days turned into weeks. John began to appreciate Emily's presence in ways he had not anticipated. She knew the land, or quickly learned, and her suggestions often improved the efficiency of his work. She remembered details he had forgotten, noticed patterns he had overlooked, and quietly offered insight that made the ranch thrive. In turn, John found himself opening up more than he had in years, sharing memories, fears, and hopes with someone who listened without judgment. Slowly, the awkwardness of the first meeting gave way to a bond that was both surprising and comforting. At the same time, John could not ignore the emotional complexity of the situation. He had anticipated romance, not family oversight. The arrival of Emily forced him to reconcile expectation with reality, to consider what he truly valued in human connection. The ranch, once a place of isolation, became a place of reflection, challenge, and unexpected joy. He realized that life had a way of surprising those who believed they had all the answers. In his quiet heart, John began to understand that relationships could take many forms, and that love and companionship did not always arrive packaged in the way one imagined. Emily's presence also reminded him of family he had never truly known. She shared stories of relatives, childhood memories, and distant connections that added color and depth to his understanding of who he was. For John, who had grown up with a father who prized the land above people, this connection was both new and enlightening. It taught him that family could be complicated, but also that it could provide support and understanding in ways he had never experienced before. By the end of the first month, a quiet rhythm had formed. John and Emily worked together efficiently, shared meals, and even found moments of humor in the daily struggles of ranch life. They laughed over spilled feed, discussed strategies for repairing fences, and shared stories of the town and its people. The ranch felt alive in a way it had not for decades, no longer just a place of work and solitude, but a home that resonated with presence and connection. John Marshall, once a man defined by loneliness and routine, began to see a new possibility in his life. The mail-order bride he had imagined might still arrive, but the bond forming with his half-sister was undeniable. She had entered his world unexpectedly, with a contract in her hand, and yet she had become a companion in work, conversation, and quiet reflection. In the vast Montana plains, surrounded by cattle and open skies, John discovered that life often had a way of bringing people together in forms he could never have predicted. And while he still thought about the bride he had hoped for, he began to wonder if perhaps the connection he had found with Emily was exactly what he needed. Someone who understood him, shared his life, and could help him navigate the complexities of the world he had built with his own hands. The ranch had begun to feel different to John Marshall. The days no longer passed in the quiet solitude that had once defined his life. Instead, there was a gentle rhythm created by Emily's presence. She woke early, moving with careful purpose, helping him feed the cattle, check fences, and inspect the water troughs. At first, John had worried that having someone else around would slow him down or disrupt his routines. But he soon realized that Emily's help made the work smoother, more organized, and even a little lighter on his shoulders. Emily was practical, observing everything with sharp eyes. She noticed when a fence post was loose, when the horses needed extra care, and when supplies were running low. Her suggestions were always considerate, never demanding, and gradually, John began to trust her judgment. It surprised him to find that he enjoyed her company, not just for the help she provided, but for the conversations they began to share. She asked about the ranch, about the animals, about his life, and more importantly, about him. John was unaccustomed to this kind of interest. People in the town respected him, but few truly cared about the thoughts behind his silence. Emily seemed genuinely curious, and that simple act of listening made a difference he could not put into words. Evenings became their time. After the cattle were settled, the horses fed, and the chores completed, John and Emily would sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the endless plains. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they simply sat in quiet companionship. Emily told him about her childhood, her memories of the family he had barely known, and the life she had led before arriving at the ranch. John shared stories of his father, the ranch, and the hard work that had shaped him. These conversations were tentative at first, cautious and careful, but over time they became natural and flowing, like water finding its course. The deeper John got to know Emily, the more he realized how little he truly knew about his own family. He had grown up with fragmented stories, whispers of half-siblings, and letters that offered glimpses of people he might never meet. Emily filled in those gaps, recounting stories of relatives and events he had never imagined. There was an honesty in her storytelling, a matter-of-fact way of presenting facts without judgment. John appreciated that clarity. For years, he had lived in the silence of assumption, and now he had facts, faces, and connections to hold on to. At the same time, John struggled with the memory of the mail-order bride he had expected. The letters still arrived, carefully written, filled with hope and excitement. Each one reminded him of the life he had dreamed of, the companion he had imagined sharing his ranch with. And yet, each letter also brought a pang of guilt. He found himself torn between what he had planned and what had unexpectedly arrived. Emily had become a part of his daily life, a presence that was reliable, comforting, and familiar. But the idea of love, the hope of romance, remained in the back of his mind. Emily seemed to sense his inner struggle without him needing to explain it. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm, she spoke softly. "John, I can see there's something on your mind. I know you're thinking about her, the woman you've been expecting. It's okay to feel torn, but maybe it's worth asking yourself what you truly need. Sometimes life gives us more than we ask for, but in forms we don't expect." John paused, gripping the wooden post he was holding, and looked at her. She wasn't demanding an answer, just offering insight. He had always prided himself on handling things alone, but there was a comfort in her understanding. He realized she wasn't there to replace anyone or control the situation. She was there to guide him gently through the unexpected. Her presence, which he had once found awkward and unsettling, now felt steadying, like the horizon after a storm. As the days passed, John noticed small changes within himself. He laughed more often, even at the mundane mishaps of ranch life. A spilled bucket of water no longer seemed frustrating, but rather an opportunity for shared amusement. When a calf was born, he found himself looking for Emily's smile before acknowledging the success of the birth. She, too, had become invested in the ranch in ways that went beyond supervision. She celebrated the small victories, offered comfort during setbacks, and shared in the physical and emotional labor that defined life on a ranch. Despite their growing bond, challenges remained. John was still learning how to balance his expectations with the reality before him. He wanted to honor the hope he had held for months while acknowledging the undeniable connection forming with Emily. It was a delicate line to walk. At times, he found himself retreating to the barn, needing space to think. Emily respected those moments, understanding that solitude was a part of who he was. She never pressed, never questioned. Instead, she continued her work quietly, allowing him the freedom to process his feelings. Their conversations deepened over time. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind whispered across the plains, John began speaking of his dreams, not the practical ones of ranch management, but the personal ones he had kept hidden. He talked about companionship, about the loneliness that had shaped him, and about the fear of opening himself to someone new. Emily listened, offering gentle responses, sharing her perspective without judgment. In her presence, John felt safe enough to reveal his vulnerabilities, a sensation he had rarely experienced in his adult life. Emily, too, shared moments of vulnerability. She recounted hardships from her past, times when she had felt lost or uncertain, and the challenges of stepping into a family she barely knew. These stories, told in quiet confidence, allowed John to see her not just as a helper or relative, but as a person with depth, strength, and resilience. He realized that life had brought them together for more than convenience. It had created an opportunity for mutual support, understanding, and growth. The ranch itself began to reflect the changes in their relationship. Tasks that had once seemed burdensome became collaborative efforts. The barn was cleaner, the fences stronger, and the fields better maintained. Animals thrived under their combined care, and the land seemed to respond to the presence of two people working in harmony rather than one. John began to notice the beauty of shared labor, the satisfaction of accomplishing tasks together, and the joy of celebrating small successes. Even as their relationship deepened, John continued to wrestle with his original expectations. Letters from the prospective bride reminded him of the life he had imagined, and the contrast with the reality of Emily's presence was sometimes jarring. Yet he found himself appreciating qualities in Emily that he had not anticipated: her patience, her intelligence, her quiet humor, and the genuine care she brought to every task. Slowly, he began to understand that companionship could take many forms, and that the strongest bonds were often built not on initial expectation, but on shared experience and trust. One particularly quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, John found himself speaking more openly than he had in years. "Emily," he said, "I never expected any of this. I thought I'd be meeting someone else entirely, someone I could imagine as a partner in life. And yet, having you here has changed things in ways I didn't know I needed." Emily smiled softly. "I know," she replied. "Life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes the people we expect to help us aren't the ones who end up doing it. And sometimes, what we need most isn't what we thought we wanted." John nodded, feeling a sense of clarity he had not felt before. The tension between expectation and reality was still there, but it had softened. He no longer felt torn, at least not entirely. Instead, he recognized the value of the bond forming between them, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared effort. It was a different kind of connection than he had imagined, but one that carried its own kind of fulfillment. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of ranch life continued to evolve. John and Emily found comfort in routines, in the shared responsibility for the land and animals, and in the quiet companionship that had grown between them. The ranch was no longer a place of solitude but a space of collaboration, laughter, and understanding. And as John looked across the fields, watching the cattle graze in the golden light of late afternoon, he realized that life had indeed brought him companionship. Though not in the form he had expected, it was real, steady, and meaningful. By the end of the season, John and Emily had established a routine that balanced work, reflection, and conversation. They celebrated small successes, navigated challenges together, and began to appreciate the depth of the relationship they had built. For John, the experience was transformative. He had learned that life's surprises could bring joy in unexpected ways, that family connections could be both grounding and enriching, and that companionship could be found in forms far beyond his original imagination. In the vast Montana plains, surrounded by cattle and open skies, John Marshall discovered that life's unexpected turns often led to the deepest and most lasting connections. Emily's arrival, once a surprise and a source of confusion, had become a gift. She had brought not just oversight, but understanding, support, and the beginnings of a bond that promised to endure. And though the mail-order bride he had imagined might still arrive someday, John knew that the life unfolding before him, with Emily by his side, was already filled with richness, meaning, and hope. Autumn had fully settled over the Montana plains, painting the fields in rich golds and reds, and the air carried the crisp scent of approaching winter. The ranch had taken on a new life since Emily's arrival. Tasks that had once felt like endless labor now had a rhythm and even a quiet joy. John Marshall had grown accustomed to her presence, though he still found himself thinking of the mail-order bride he had long hoped for. Letters from her continued to arrive, carefully written, filled with excitement and expectation, reminding him of the life he had imagined but had not yet realized. It was during one of these golden afternoons, as John checked the water troughs with Emily, that the tension he had been avoiding began to surface. Emily noticed the way his hands trembled slightly when opening the latest letter. "John," she said softly, "I see her letters are still arriving. Are you thinking about what to do?" John sighed, looking across the vast fields. "I am," he admitted. "I thought I wanted her, believed I did, but now it's complicated. I didn't expect to feel this way, to have someone like you here helping me, sharing this life. It's hard to know what's right." Emily nodded, understanding. "It is hard, and there is no right or wrong answer. But perhaps what's most important is honesty. Honesty with yourself about what you truly want, not what you imagined." The days that followed were filled with careful observation and reflection. John paid closer attention to his feelings, watching how he reacted when Emily shared a joke, helped with a stubborn calf, or patiently guided him through a tricky fence repair. He realized that her presence brought a sense of ease and comfort he had not experienced in years. Yet the thought of the bride remained, pulling at him with the promise of romance, companionship, and a life that matched the dreams he had carried for so long. Emily continued to support him without intrusion. She never pressured him or asked for decisions. Instead, she worked quietly, offering insight when needed, and creating a safe space for him to think. One evening, after a long day of tending cattle, she said gently, "John, perhaps it's time to consider what will bring you the most fulfillment. The woman you expect may arrive, yes, but what about the bond we've built here? Could it be more meaningful than you realize?" Her words stayed with him long after the fire had burned low and the stars were bright in the night sky. John had always valued independence, solitude, and the steady rhythm of ranch life. Yet he was learning that companionship and connection could enrich life in ways he had not anticipated. Emily was not a romantic partner, and she was not the bride he had envisioned. But she was family, and family could offer loyalty, understanding, and a shared life that might be more enduring than fleeting romance. Over the next weeks, John faced moments of inner conflict. When letters arrived from the bride, he would read them, imagining the possibility of a new life. But when he returned to the ranch, to Emily's calm presence and the daily routines they shared, he felt a sense of belonging that the letters could not provide. He realized that what he had longed for, companionship, support, someone who truly understood the demands of ranch life, was already present in a form he had not expected. One chilly morning, John decided to visit the nearby town. He needed to speak with the postmaster, confirm the details of the bride's arrival, and perhaps make a decision about continuing the arrangement. Emily insisted on coming along, not out of curiosity, but because she wanted to offer guidance and moral support. Together they rode in silence, the crisp wind in their faces, and the sound of hooves echoing across the empty fields. In town, John gathered the letters and spoke with the postmaster. Each letter was carefully examined, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had promised himself he would consider all possibilities, yet the thought of continuing the arrangement now seemed distant. Emily's presence, her unwavering support, and the bond they had formed made him realize that the life he imagined with a stranger might pale in comparison to the life unfolding before him. As they returned to the ranch, John reflected on the months that had passed. He thought of the long mornings feeding the cattle, the shared meals, the evenings by the fire, and the conversations that had revealed truths about his family and himself. He remembered moments of laughter, frustration, and triumph, all shared with Emily. For the first time in years, he felt fully understood, fully seen, and fully connected to another person. That night, as the wind howled across the plains, John and Emily sat together in the kitchen, the glow of the lamp casting warm light across their faces. He finally spoke what had been on his mind for weeks. "Emily, I've been thinking a lot about her, the woman I expected. I imagined her arrival for so long, but now, I don't know if she could ever understand this life the way you do. The ranch, the work, the animals, you understand it all." Emily listened carefully, her eyes calm and steady. "John," she said gently, "I never wanted to replace anyone, but sometimes life gives us choices we don't expect. Perhaps this is one of those times. You have to decide what will make you happiest, not what you thought you wanted months ago." The next days were filled with reflection and discussion. John considered the responsibilities and expectations that had come with the mail-order bride plan, but he also weighed the realities of the bond forming with Emily. The decision was not easy. On one hand, he had hoped for romantic companionship. On the other, he now valued the deep understanding, trust, and shared effort that Emily brought to his life. It was a choice between an imagined ideal and a tangible, meaningful connection already present. One morning, as frost covered the fields and the breath of animals rose in the cold air, John made his decision. He would no longer pursue the mail-order bride arrangement. Instead, he would focus on the life he had already begun to share with Emily. The choice was not just practical but emotional, born from months of observing, reflecting, and experiencing the quiet but profound bond between them. He realized that life's surprises could bring fulfillment in ways he had never imagined, and that the path before him, though unplanned, was rich with possibility. He approached Emily as she tended to a group of calves. The morning sun cast long shadows across the field, highlighting the golden grass and the gentle curves of the land. "Emily," he said, his voice steady, "I've made my decision. I'm not going to continue with the bride plan. I've realized that what I really needed was here all along. You've shown me something I never expected: support, understanding, and a connection that matters more than anything I imagined. Emily looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and warmth. John, I'm glad you've come to this realization. I never wanted to take your choice away from you, but I've always hoped you would see the value in what we've built together. This, this life we share, it's real and it matters. From that moment, their lives shifted. The ranch became not just a place of work, but a home filled with shared effort, laughter, and understanding. Tasks were completed together, problems solved in tandem, and small victories celebrated side by side. The animals thrived under their combined care, and the land responded to the rhythm of two people working in harmony rather than one. John also felt a new sense of peace. The longing he had carried for months, the anxiety about a future with a stranger, and the tension of unfulfilled expectation began to fade. In its place was satisfaction, contentment, and a deep appreciation for the bond he shared with Emily. He understood that life did not always follow the plans one made, and that sometimes the unexpected path led to the most meaningful outcomes. The bond between John and Emily grew stronger with each passing day. They shared stories, solved problems together, and supported each other through challenges. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude and isolation, had become a place of collaboration, trust, and connection. John had discovered that family, understanding, and shared life could provide a fulfillment far deeper than any imagined romance. And as the season changed, with winter slowly approaching, John knew that he had made the right choice. He had chosen the reality of a meaningful bond over the uncertainty of a distant ideal. Emily had become an integral part of his life, not just as family, but as a partner in the work, care, and quiet joys of ranch life. Together, they had built something real, something enduring, grounded, and deeply satisfying. In the quiet moments, standing on the porch or walking through the fields, John often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Life had surprised him in ways he could not have predicted, and he had learned that expectations, no matter how carefully imagined, could never replace the richness of reality. He had chosen to embrace the unexpected, and in doing so, had discovered a happiness that was both profound and lasting. Winter had settled over the Montana plains, and the ranch was blanketed in soft white snow. The world seemed quieter than ever, with only the sound of the wind through the trees and the occasional call of a distant bird breaking the silence. For John Marshall, the season brought a sense of calm he had not known for years. The months since Emily's arrival had transformed his life in ways he had never imagined. What had begun as a disruption to his carefully planned solitude had evolved into a bond that brought warmth, trust, and companionship into every aspect of his days. John and Emily had established a rhythm that suited both of them. Mornings began early, with the feeding of cattle and checking of fences, and the days were filled with tasks that required cooperation, patience, and care. Even when the work was physically demanding, it felt lighter because they shared it. They laughed together over minor accidents, celebrated small achievements, and supported each other through the challenges that life on a ranch always presented. John had learned to appreciate Emily not just as family, but as a partner in all the practical and emotional aspects of ranch life. The evenings were the most treasured time of day. After the chores were done, they would sit together in the warmth of the kitchen or on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one across the clear night sky. Sometimes they spoke about plans for the ranch, about the animals, or about the town and the people they knew. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, sharing the peace that only comes from being truly understood. For John, these moments were a revelation. He had spent decades alone, assuming that solitude was the only way to live a meaningful life. Emily had shown him otherwise. With winter came the quieter work of the ranch, mending tools, preparing feed for the animals, and planning for the months ahead. Emily's presence made this work easier and more rewarding. She had a practical mind, an understanding of animals, and a patience that complemented John's own determination and skill. Together, they found solutions to problems that would have been overwhelming for one person alone. They discovered new methods to improve efficiency and even created small innovations that made life easier during the harsh winter months. The ranch, once a symbol of solitary labor, now represented shared effort, creativity, and mutual respect. Yet the emotional transformation was even more profound than the practical one. John had faced the difficult decision of whether to continue with the mail-order-bride plan, and he had chosen instead to embrace the life unfolding with Emily. That choice had required courage, reflection, and honesty with himself. It had meant letting go of a long-held expectation and trusting that life's surprises could bring fulfillment in forms he had not anticipated. That decision had been the turning point. It allowed him to accept Emily fully, not as a temporary presence, not as a helper or overseer, but as family, companion, and a partner in all the ways that mattered. Over the following months, the bond between John and Emily strengthened in ways neither could have predicted. They began to share memories, dreams, and stories from the past that had never been spoken aloud. Emily spoke of her childhood, of relatives and places John had never known, and of experiences that had shaped her character and resilience. John, in turn, shared stories of his father, of the ranch's history, and of his own hopes and fears. These exchanges created a deep trust between them, a sense of understanding that could not be manufactured or forced. Life on the ranch also became a lesson in patience and collaboration. There were moments of disagreement, small conflicts over tasks, priorities, or approaches to work. But each time, they learned to communicate openly, to listen carefully, and to compromise when necessary. These moments strengthened their connection, teaching them not only to work together, but also to respect each other's perspective. John realized that the strength of any relationship, whether family or otherwise, depended on patience, empathy, and the willingness to understand the other person. As the season progressed, John began to notice changes within himself. He laughed more easily, felt lighter in spirit, and found joy in small, everyday moments that he had long overlooked. The satisfaction of a well-tended field, the success of a calf's birth, or the simple act of sitting together by the fire took on new meaning. Emily's influence had shifted his perspective, allowing him to see the beauty in connection, collaboration, and shared life. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a space of growth. Community life also became more meaningful. Neighbors who once saw John as a solitary figure now witnessed the partnership he shared with Emily. Their interactions with the town and surrounding families took on a new warmth. People commented on the change, noticing the ease and harmony in the ranch's operations. John felt a quiet pride, not in his accomplishments alone, but in the life he had built with Emily, a life rooted in trust, understanding, and mutual respect. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the windows, John reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. He thought of the letters from the mail-order bride, the anticipation he had felt, and the unexpected arrival of Emily with the contract. What had initially seemed a disruption had become the most significant turning point of his life. He realized that happiness and fulfillment were not always found in the forms we expect. Sometimes, life's greatest gifts arrive unannounced, quietly, and in ways that challenge our assumptions. Emily noticed his quiet reflection and joined him by the fire. "You're thinking again," she said softly, with a gentle smile. John nodded. "I am. I keep thinking about what could have been, the life I imagined. And yet, I wouldn't trade this, what we have now, for anything. You've shown me something I never expected. You've made this ranch, this life, into something I never thought I could have on my own." Emily reached over, placing a hand on his. "And you've shown me the same. I came here to help with a responsibility, not knowing what I would find. But this connection, this shared life, it matters. We've built something real, John, and that's worth more than any plan or expectation." Together, they sat in the warm glow of the fire, listening to the wind outside, feeling the comfort of presence and understanding. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude, now embodied companionship, resilience, and the quiet joys of shared effort. John knew that life's surprises could be daunting, even confusing, but that embracing them with an open heart could lead to a happiness deeper than he had ever imagined. Over the following months, they continued to strengthen their life together. They repaired fences, tended to the animals, and planned for the spring planting. The ranch flourished under their combined care, and John felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond physical labor. It was a fulfillment born of partnership, shared responsibility, and the trust that had grown between them. The land itself seemed to respond to their efforts, vibrant and thriving even in the harshness of winter. Emily and John also began to establish traditions that reflected their bond. Simple routines, morning coffee by the kitchen window, evening walks through the fields, and shared meals by the fire, became anchors in their days. They celebrated holidays together, bringing small joys to the ranch that had long been absent. Friends from town visited, sharing stories, laughter, and support, and John felt a new sense of belonging within the broader community. The bond between them deepened further as they faced challenges together. Harsh storms, unexpected injuries to animals, and the constant demands of ranch life tested their resilience. Yet each challenge strengthened their connection, teaching them patience, understanding, and the importance of mutual support. John realized that life's difficulties, when faced together, could become opportunities for growth, trust, and shared accomplishment. By the end of winter, John Marshall understood that he had found something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. The mail-order bride he had expected was a distant memory, replaced by the presence of Emily, a companion, a partner, and family. She had brought not just practical support but emotional depth, understanding, and a sense of belonging that John had longed for but never known. Together, they had transformed the ranch into a home, a place of warmth, care, and shared purpose. As spring approached, the ranch blossomed once more. Green grass returned to the fields, calves were born, and life resumed its vibrant rhythm. John and Emily worked side by side, each day reinforcing the bond that had grown through months of shared experience. The challenges of ranch life remained, but they faced them with confidence, knowing that they were stronger together than alone. John often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as anticipation for a mail-order bride had turned into a profound discovery of family, trust, and the unexpected ways life can fulfill us. He had learned that true connection often comes in forms we do not predict, that love and companionship are not always found in imagined ideals, and that the support of someone who understands us deeply can be the greatest gift of all. In the vast Montana plains, under wide skies and amidst rolling fields, John and Emily had built a life that was rich, fulfilling, and deeply meaningful. Their story was one of unexpected arrivals, difficult choices, and the discovery of what truly matters. The ranch, once a place of isolation, had become a home filled with laughter, understanding, and shared purpose. And as John looked out over the fields, he knew with certainty that he had found something enduring, something far more valuable than he had ever anticipated. John and Emily's lives continued, not in the way John had originally imagined, but in a way far richer and more satisfying. They had discovered that happiness was not about meeting expectations, but about embracing the reality before them, nurturing bonds of trust and care, and finding joy in the shared journey. And in that understanding, they found a deep, lasting fulfillment that neither could have imagined when Emily first stepped onto the ranch with a contract in her hands.